I was standing at the nurse's station when it happened. Not dramatically, not with witnesses who'd later defend me, just standing there, like I'd done for 32 years in that hospital. Susan, my supervisor, 20 years younger, with that tight smile she wore like armor, walked up holding a tablet. Behind her, 3 residents, all of them already smirking. "Margaret, we're reassigning the post-op from room 214. I looked up. "The sepsis case? I've been monitoring her since Dr. Chun will take it from here." She didn't even meet my eyes. Just tapped the screen. "You'll cover medication rounds on the geriatric wing instead." One of the residents coughed. It sounded like a laugh. I felt my face go hot. The geriatric wing. The place they sent nurses when they wanted them out of the way, when they wanted them to feel useless. "Susan, I've handled sepsis protocols since before Margaret." She finally looked at me, and her voice dropped just low enough that only I could hear the pity in it. "You're doing great work, really. But this is a complex case, and we need someone who can keep up. Keep up." The words landed like a slap. Someone behind me whispered, "She probably didn't even hear the update in morning briefing." More laughter. Quiet, casual, like I wasn't even there. Susan turned and walked away, her little entourage following. I stood there, staring at the tablet in my hand, my access to room 214 already grayed out. They'd locked me out. Not because I'd made a mistake, not because the patient complained, but because I was old and slow and, apparently, forgettable. I swallowed hard and headed toward the geriatric wing, keeping my head down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The hospital issued one we used for interdepartmental calls. I pulled it out. One missed call. No name. Just a Washington, D.C. area code. And a voicemail, automatically saved. I stared at it. Who the hell calls a floor nurse from D.C.? Before I could listen, the PA system crackled. Administrative staff to the director's office. Immediately, I glanced up. 2 department heads were speed walking down the hallway. A third was on her phone, her face pale. Something was happening. I looked back at my phone, at the voicemail, at the number I didn't recognize, and then I saw it. On the counter, half hidden under a stack of charts, a printed form. My name was on it. Margaret Collier, RN. Credential verification requested. My heart started pounding. Why would anyone be verifying my credentials? I reached for the paper, but a hand slammed down on top of it. "Susan!" She grabbed the form and shoved it into a folder. Her smile was gone. "Margaret," she said quietly, "go home early today. You look tired." I wasn't tired, but I nodded, because I'd learned a long time ago that arguing only made things worse. I walked to the locker room, grabbed my bag, and leapt through the side door. My hands were shaking as I got into my car. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Then I pressed play on the voicemail. The voice was calm, professional, male. "Ms. Collier, this is the Office of Personnel Management, calling on behalf of a federal inquiry. We need to confirm your current employment status and availability for immediate consultation. Please return this call within 24 hours. I played it again and again. Federal inquiry. Immediate consultation. I looked back at the hospital, at the building where I'd given 3 decades of my life, where I'd just been told I couldn't keep up, and I realized something. Someone outside those walls still knew exactly who I was. I didn't sleep that night. I kept playing the voicemail, over and over, trying to make sense of it. Federal inquiry. My name. A request for availability. None of it fit with the version of me that Susan had decided I was. The one who couldn't keep up. The one who needed to be shuffled off to the geriatric wing like I belonged there myself. By 6 a.m., I was back in the hospital parking lot, 30 minutes early for my shift. I needed to understand what that form meant. Why my credentials were being verified. and why Susan looked so rattled when she saw it. I clocked in and headed straight for the administrative wing. The hallways were quieter, up here carpeted, with framed photos of hospital donors and that sterile corporate smell that made everything feel important and cold at the same time. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I'd been invisible for months. Nobody would notice. Except someone did. Margaret, I turned. It was Jim Frazier, one of the senior administrators. He'd been at the hospital almost as long as I had, working his way up from transport services to operations management. We'd shared coffee in the break room more times than I could count. He looked exhausted. "Jim, just come with me." He glanced down the hallway, then gestured toward a small conference room. Now, my stomach dropped, but I followed. He closed the door behind us and pulled out a chair. "Sit." I sat. He rubbed his face, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe? Or fear. "Margaret, I need you to be straight with me. Did you return a call yesterday? From Washington?" I hesitated. "I got a voicemail. I haven't called back yet." He exhaled slowly. "Good. Don't. Not until I tell you what's happening. What's going on?" Jim leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Yesterday afternoon, we received a formal request from the Office of Personnel Management. They wanted confirmation of your employment status, your licensing, your schedule, and your professional history going back 15 years. Why? I don't know. They wouldn't say, but Margaret." He paused, like he was weighing whether to tell me the rest. "Susan tried to bury it." I stared at him. "What do you mean, bury it?" "She told HR the request was probably a mistake, that you were nearing retirement anyway and it wasn't worth the paperwork. She suggested they respond saying you were unavailable due to medical leave." The air left my lungs. "I wasn't on medical leave." "I know." His jaw tightened. "That's why I pulled the file myself. And when I checked your personnel record, I found something strange." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of performance reviews. Mine. All excellent. Consistently excellent. But the most recent one, dated 2 months ago, had a note attached. "Employee shows signs of cognitive decline. Recommend gradual transition to less critical responsibilities." I'd never seen that note before. "I didn't write that," I whispered. "I know you didn't." Jim's voice was hard now. "Susan did. And she submitted it without your knowledge." My hands were shaking. "Why would she? Because she's been trying to phase you out for 6 months, Margaret. She wants her own people in leadership positions, younger nurses, people she can control." He paused. "But here's the thing. Whoever called from Washington doesn't care what Susan wants." I looked up at him. "What else did you find?" Jim pulled out another document. Older, creased, a letter on federal letterhead, dated 11 years ago. It was addressed to me. "Ms. Collier, thank you for your contributions to the National Hospital Preparedness Task Force. Your insights on critical care protocols during multi-casualty events have been integrated into our national framework. You remain listed as a consulting resource should your expertise be required." I remembered now. Barely. It had been a 2-day seminar in Baltimore. I'd presented a case study, answered some questions, signed a few forms. I didn't think anyone had listened. "They kept your name, Margaret," Jim said quietly. "And yesterday, someone pulled it." I stared at the letter, my throat tight. "Susan doesn't know about this, does she?" "No, and she can't. Not yet." Jim leaned back. "Because if this request is real, and she's been deliberately undermining you..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I stood up slowly, the folder still in my hands. "What do I do?" Jim met my eyes. "You call them back. And you tell the truth?" I nodded. But as I walked out of that room, one question burned in my mind. If someone in Washington still trusted me, Why was my own hospital trying so hard to make me disappear? By the time I got to the nurse's station, Susan was already there. She didn't look at me, just kept typing on her tablet, her jaw tight, her shoulders stiff. I clocked in, checked my assignment. Geriatric wing again. Of course. But I wasn't going quietly this time. I walked up to her. Susan, I need to talk to you about my schedule. She didn't look up. You're where you need to be, Margaret. I'm capable of handling critical care. You know that? Now she looked at me. Her eyes were flat, cold. Margaret, I think it's time we had a conversation about your future here. She stood and gestured toward a small office off the hallway. I followed, my pulse starting to hammer. She closed the door behind us and sat down behind the desk. There was already a folder waiting. My name on the tab. Have a seat. I sat. Susan opened the folder and slid a printed form across the desk. It was a performance improvement plan, pre-filled, dated today. We've been noticing some concerns, she said, her voice calm, clinical. Missed updates in patient charts? Delayed responses during high-pressure situations? Confusion about new protocols? I stared at the paper. That's not true. Margaret, it's okay to admit when things are getting harder. At your age, it's natural too. I haven't missed anything. Her smile was thin, practiced. I understand this is difficult, but we have documentation. She pulled out another sheet. A list of dates, times, incidents I supposedly mishandled. I scanned it quickly. My stomach turned. 2 of the dates I hadn't even been working. I'd been at a dentist appointment. The 3rd was a shift I'd covered. Flawlessly I remembered it because the attending physician had personally thanked me. This is fabricated, I said quietly. Susan's expression didn't change. I'm going to need you to sign this, Margaret. It's a formality. Just acknowledging that we've discussed your performance and that you're committed to improvement. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to bury me. I'm not signing this. Her smile disappeared. Margaret, these dates are wrong. These incidents didn't happen. And you know it. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I'm trying to be compassionate here. But if you refuse to acknowledge the issue, I'll have no choice but to escalate this to HR. Then escalate it. Her eyes narrowed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said, standing. You are? I walked out before she could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was rage. I went straight to the employee resource office and requested a copy of my full personnel file. The clerk hesitated, glancing toward the administrative wing, but she printed it anyway. I took it to the break room and sat down. And that's when I found it. Buried in the digital access logs, a record of every time my credentials had been used to log into the hospital system. 3 entries from last week. Times I wasn't at work. Someone had been accessing patient files under my name. I pulled out my phone and called Jim. I need you to see something, I said. Now? 20 minutes later, we were back in the small conference room. Jim stared at the access logs, his face pale. This is identity fraud, he said quietly. If they're using your credentials without your knowledge, they're covering something up. He nodded slowly. Or setting you up. My phone buzzed. The hospital line. I looked at the screen. It was an internal transfer. From compliance. I answered. Ms. Collier, this is Andrea from compliance. We need you to come in for a meeting. Today. 2P.M. What's this about? We've received a report regarding irregular access to restricted patient files. Your credentials were flagged. My blood went cold. I didn't access any restricted files. We still need to meet. It's mandatory. She hung up. I looked at Jim. They're going to fire me. Not if we move first. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling legal. And you're calling Washington. Right now. I stared at the phone in my hand. The voicemail I hadn't returned. The federal inquiry that Susan tried to bury. I took a breath, and I dialed. The line rang once. Office of Personnel Management. How can I direct your call? This is Margaret Collier, I said. I'm returning a call about a federal inquiry. There was a pause, then a click, and a new voice. Calm, authoritative. Ms. Collier, we've been waiting for you. The voice on the other end was steady, professional, the kind that didn't waste time. Ms. Collier, this is David Brennan, Deputy Director of Operational Readiness. I need to confirm a few details before we proceed. I gripped the phone tighter. Jim was watching me from across the table, his arms crossed. Go ahead, I said. You are currently employed as a registered nurse at County General Hospital, correct? Yes. And you participated in the National Hospital Preparedness Task Force Symposium in Baltimore in 2014? I blinked. That was 11 years ago. I barely remembered the hotel, let alone the seminar. Yes. I presented a case study on multi-trauma triage, correct? And you were subsequently added to our national consulting roster for critical care protocol development. I didn't know I was still on that list. There was a pause. You are. And your name was flagged 2 days ago during a review of personnel with relevant field experience. Flagged for what? I can't discuss that over the phone. But I can tell you that we attempted to verify your employment status through standard channels yesterday. And your hospital administration informed us you were unavailable. My stomach turned. That's not true. We're aware. His tone sharpened slightly. Which is why I'm calling you directly, Ms. Collier. Are you currently available for consultation on a time-sensitive federal matter? I looked at Jim. He nodded. Yes, I said. I am. Good. I'll need documentation confirming your current licensure, certifications, and a notarized statement of availability. Can you provide that within 48 hours? Yes. Expect a formal follow-up within 24 hours? And Ms. Collier? He paused. If anyone at your facility attempts to interfere with this process, contact me immediately. He gave me a direct number. I wrote it down with shaking hands. Understood. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. I set the phone down slowly. Jim leaned forward. What did he say? They want documentation. They tried to verify my status, and the hospital told them I was unavailable. His jaw clenched. Susan. She tried to block this. I looked up at him. Why would she do that? Because she doesn't know what this is about, Jim said. And she's terrified it'll expose what she's been doing to you. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was filling up with the evening shift. Nurses coming in. Doctors heading out. The same rhythm I'd followed for 32 years. And somewhere in that building, someone was trying to erase me. Jim, I need those access logs. The ones showing someone used my credentials? Already on it. He pulled out his phone. I'm sending copies to legal and to my personal email. If compliance tries to delete them, they'll have backups. He nodded. I checked the time. 1:30. The compliance meeting was in 30 minutes. I'm not going in there without proof, I said. You won't have to. Jim stood. I'm coming with you. The compliance office was on the 3rd floor, tucked behind HR in a windowless room that smelled like old carpet and anxiety. Andrea was waiting. Mid-40s sharp suit, clipboard in hand. She gestured to 2 chairs across from her desk. Ms. Collier, Mr. Fraser. She didn't smile. Thank you for coming. I sat. Jim stayed standing. Let's get to it, Andrea said, opening a file. We've identified 3 instances in the past week where your credentials were used to access restricted patient files outside of your assigned cases. I didn't access those files, I said. The system shows otherwise. The system can be manipulated. Her eyes flicked up. Are you suggesting someone used your login without authorization? Yes? Do you have proof? Jim stepped forward and placed a printed spreadsheet on her desk. These are the access logs. The timestamps show Margaret's credentials were used while she was off-site. We have her punch-in records to prove it. Andrea stared at the paper. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her throat move. This will need to be investigated. It already has been, Jim said. And we're filing a formal complaint. Someone in this hospital is committing identity fraud. Andrea closed the file. I'll need to escalate this. Do that, I said. And while you're at it, I want an explanation for why Susan Matthews told a federal agency I was unavailable when I'm currently employed full-time. The room went very still. Andrea looked at me, then at Jim. I'm sorry, what federal agency? I pulled out my phone and showed her the call log. The DC number? The voicemail. The Office of Personnel Management called yesterday to verify my employment. Susan told them I was on medical leave. I wasn't. I want to know why she lied. Andrea's face went pale. She stood abruptly. I need to speak with the director. This meeting is over. She left the room without another word. Jim looked at me. You just backed her into a corner. Good, I said. Let's see who comes out of it. We walked back downstairs in silence. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Documentation received. Expect courier tomorrow at 10 a.m. Do not sign anything hospital-related until further notice. I showed Jim. He exhaled slowly. Margaret, I don't know what you got yourself into. But whatever it is, it's bigger than Susan, I finished. He nodded. I looked down the hallway, toward the nurses' station, toward the place I used to feel like I belonged. And I realized something. I wasn't being pushed out. I was being protected by someone who still remembered what I was capable of. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital an hour early. I didn't go to the nurses' station. I went straight to the main lobby and sat in one of the stiff vinyl chairs near the information desk, clutching a folder with every piece of documentation I could find: licenses, certifications, performance reviews from before Susan started rewriting history. At exactly 10 a.m., a man in a dark suit walked through the automatic doors. He didn't look around, didn't check his phone, just walked directly to me. Ms. Collier? I stood. Yes. He extended a hand. Michael Torres. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Brennan. His grip was firm, professional. He had the kind of presence that made people move out of the way without him asking. Is there somewhere private we can speak? He asked. I led him to a small consultation room off the main hallway, the kind they used for delivering bad news to families. It was quiet, empty. He closed the door and set a leather briefcase on the table. Before we begin, I need to confirm your identity. He pulled out a tablet. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Some may seem unusual, but they're necessary. Go ahead. He asked me my full name, my date of birth, my nursing license number. Then he asked about Baltimore, the symposium, specific details about the case study I'd presented. I answered each one. He nodded, satisfied, and made a note on the tablet. Miss Collier, I need to be direct with you. The reason we're here is because your name came up in a review of personnel with experience in high-acuity crisis management. Specifically, scenarios involving mass casualty events and resource-limited decision-making. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of scenario? I can't discuss specifics. But I can tell you that we attempted to contact your employer to verify availability, and we were told you were unavailable due to health-related leave. That's a lie, we know. His expression didn't change, which is why I'm here. We need to understand if there's an institutional issue preventing your participation. I hesitated. Then I opened my folder and slid the documents across the table. The falsified performance review. The fabricated incident report. The access logs showing someone had used my credentials. My supervisor has been trying to force me out for months, I said quietly. She's been documenting false performance issues, limiting my access to critical cases, and telling people I'm cognitively declining. Yesterday, she tried to make me sign a document saying I was confused and slow. Michael's jaw tightened as he read. And when your name came up in our inquiry, she tried to bury it. He set the papers down and looked at me. Really looked at me. Ms. Collier, how long have you been a nurse? 32 years. And in that time, have you ever been formally disciplined? No. Ever had a patient complaint upheld? No. Ever been found negligent or incompetent in any clinical capacity? No. He nodded slowly. Then I need you to understand something. The people I work for don't care about office politics. They don't care about hospital hierarchies. They care about one thing: competence under pressure. And your name is on a very short list of people who have demonstrated that competence in real-world conditions. My throat felt tight. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be available. That's all. If we need you, we'll call. And when we do, we need to know that you can respond without interference. And if my hospital tries to stop me? Michael's expression hardened. They won't. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Official letterhead. Federal seal. This is a formal notification of consultation. It confirms that you are currently under consideration for a temporary assignment to a federal project. Your employer is required by law to accommodate this without retaliation. He slid it across the table along with a pen. Sign here. And keep a copy. I signed. He placed one copy in his briefcase and handed me the other. Ms. Collier, I want you to know something. He stood and picked up his case. When we pulled your file, we didn't just see a name on a list. We saw someone who made decisions in Baltimore that are still being taught in training programs today. Someone who didn't panic, who didn't freeze, who did the right thing when no one else knew what the right thing was. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Seen, not as an old woman, not as a liability, as someone who knew what she was doing. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded. Someone will be in touch within 48 hours. Until then, don't let anyone make you feel small. He left. I sat there for a long time, staring at the document in my hands. Then I stood, walked out of that room, and headed toward the administrative wing. I found Susan in her office. She looked up, startled. I set the federal notification on her desk. I thought you should see this, I said calmly. She read it. Her face went white. Margaret, I don't. I kept my voice even, steady. I know what you've been doing, and now, so do they. I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard her phone ring. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the geriatric wing. I went to the employee records office and requested a full audit of my digital access history. The clerk, a young woman named Shanice, who'd always been kind to me, hesitated when she saw the request form. Ms. Collier, this requires supervisor approval. I slid the federal notification across the counter. She read it. Her eyes went wide. I'll have it ready in 20 minutes. I waited in the hallway, watching the hospital move around me. Doctors rushing past, nurses checking charts, families waiting for news. This place had been my life, and someone had tried to take it from me. Shanice came back with a thick envelope. Everything's in here. Digital logs, badge swipes, system access, timestamps. I included the last 6 months. Thank you. She lowered her voice. Ms. Collier, whatever's happening, I hope you're okay. I nodded. I will be. I took the envelope to the parking lot and sat in my car. Inside were pages of data, rows and rows of timestamps and file names. And there it was. 3 entries from last Tuesday. My credentials. Accessing restricted patient files in the oncology wing. I hadn't been near oncology in weeks. I cross-referenced the times with my badge swipes. At 2:17 p.m., my login accessed a file. But my badge showed I'd been in the cafeteria. At 4:43 p.m., another file. My badge clocked out. I'd left for a dentist appointment. Someone wasn't just using my credentials. They were doing it while I had alibis. I pulled out my phone and called Jim. I have proof, I said. Someone's been accessing files under my name while I was off-site, and I can prove I wasn't there. Bring it to me. Now. I drove the envelope straight to his office. He spread the documents across his desk, his expression darkening with every page. This is deliberate, he said quietly. They knew you'd have alibis. They didn't care. Why would someone do this? Jim sat back, thinking, what kind of files were accessed? I checked the log. Oncology patients, all terminal cases, all within the last month. Billing records? I don't know. The log doesn't show what was viewed, just that the files were opened. Jim picked up his phone. I'm calling our data security team. If someone's altering records or accessing billing information, his door opened. Susan stood in the doorway. Her face was tight, controlled, but her hands were shaking. Jim, I need to speak with you. Privately. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Margaret. Susan's jaw clenched. The director wants to see both of you. Now. The director's office was on the top floor. Corner view. Polished wood. The kind of place that made you feel small before anyone even spoke. Director Patricia Vance sat behind her desk, reading something on her computer. She didn't look up when we entered. Sit. We sat. She finally looked at us. Her expression was unreadable. Margaret, I've just gotten off the phone with our legal department. They've been contacted by federal auditors requesting access to your personnel file, your licensing history, and your employment records going back 15 years. I'm aware, I said. Are you also aware that you signed a consultation notification without informing your direct supervisor? I wasn't required to inform her. Patricia's eyes narrowed. You were required to inform HR. I informed no one because my supervisor has been actively trying to sabotage my employment. Susan made a noise. That's not quiet, Patricia said sharply. She turned back to me. These are serious accusations, Margaret. And I have documentation. I pulled out the folder. The falsified reviews. The fabricated incidents. The access logs. I slid them across the desk. Patricia read in silence. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. Finally, she looked up at Susan. Explain this. Susan's face was pale. Those performance reviews were based on legitimate concerns. These dates show Margaret was off-site when the incident supposedly occurred. There must be a mistake, and someone accessed restricted files using her credentials while she wasn't in the building. That's not a mistake. That's fraud. Susan opened her mouth, closed it. Patricia leaned back in her chair. I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of things. But I've never seen a supervisor falsify records to force out a senior nurse with a spotless record. I wasn't forcing her out. I was trying to save it. Patricia's voice was ice. Federal auditors are arriving tomorrow morning. They're going to review every file you've touched in the last year. And if they find what I think they're going to find, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose your license. Susan stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She's old. She can't handle the work anymore. Everyone knows it. The words hung in the air. Patricia stared at her. Get out of my office. Susan hesitated. Now. She left, slamming the door behind her. Patricia turned to me. Margaret, I owe you an apology. This should never have happened. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. The federal auditors will need access to the full system. Jim, I'm authorizing it. Give them everything. Understood. Patricia stood and walked around the desk. She extended her hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I shook her hand. And for the first time in months, I felt something shift. Not victory, just space to breathe. The auditors arrived at 8 a.m. 2 of them, both in suits. both carrying federal credentials and laptops that looked like they cost more than my car. They didn't make small talk, didn't smile, just sat up in a conference room and started requesting files, personnel records, digital access logs, email correspondence, scheduling systems, everything. Jim coordinated from his office, feeding them data in organized batches. I stayed out of the way, working my shift on the geriatric wing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The nurses who used to laugh when I walked by now avoided eye contact. The residents who smirked at Susan's comments suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Word had spread. Federal investigation, fraud, falsified records. No one knew the details, but they knew enough. At noon, I took my lunch break in the courtyard. It was quiet, cold, the kind of day where you could see your breath. My phone buzzed. A text from Jim. They found something. Come to the conference room. I walked back inside, my heart pounding. When I opened the door, the two auditors were standing over a laptop. One of them, a woman named Agent Carr, gestured for me to sit. Miss Collier, we've reviewed the access logs you provided. I sat. We've also pulled security footage from the hallways during the times your credentials were used to access restricted files. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a hallway I recognized. The one outside the records room. The timestamp read 2:17 p.m. last Tuesday. A figure walked into frame. Susan? She glanced around, then slid a keycard through the reader. The door opened. She went inside. Agent Carr clicked to another clip. Same hallway. Different day. 4:43 p.m. Susan again. We cross-referenced the keycard logs, Agent Carr said. She used her supervisor override to access the records room. But she logged in under your credentials to open the files. My stomach turned. Why? The other auditor, a man named Agent Monroe, spoke for the first time. We're still determining that. But we've identified a pattern. Every file she accessed under your name was a terminal oncology patient. And every one of those patients had their insurance claims flagged for review within 48 hours. She was altering billing records. We believe so. She'd access the file, make changes to treatment codes, then submit amended claims for higher reimbursement. When the insurance companies audited, your credentials were the ones attached to the changes. I stared at the screen. She wasn't just trying to get rid of me. She was setting me up to take the fall for fraud. How much? I asked quietly. Agent Carr glanced at her notes. Preliminary estimate? Over $200,000 in fraudulent billing over the past 6 months? The room tilted. Ms. Collier. Agent Monroe leaned forward. If you hadn't provided those access logs when you did, this would have continued. And eventually, the insurance companies would have flagged your name, not hers. I couldn't breathe. What happens now? We're forwarding our findings to the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division. Ms. Matthews will be placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal investigation. Agent Carr closed the laptop. You may be called to testify, but as far as we're concerned, you're a witness, not a suspect. I nodded. They left. I sat there alone, staring at the empty conference room. Susan hadn't just wanted me gone. She'd wanted me destroyed. By 3 p.m., the entire hospital knew. Security escorted Susan out of the building. No box of belongings. No goodbye. Just a quiet walk to the parking lot with 2 officers flanking her. I watched from the nurse's station. She didn't look at me. Didn't look at anyone. Just got in her car and drove away. The nurses around me were silent. One of the younger ones, a woman named Becca, who'd laughed the loudest when Susan made her jokes, cleared her throat. Ms. Collier? I'm sorry. I looked at her. She couldn't meet my eyes. I should have said something. I knew she was wrong. I didn't want to get in trouble. I nodded. I know. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. None of them did. I finished my shift and went home. But before I left, I stopped by Jim's office. He was on the phone, but he waved me in. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. "The board is meeting tonight," he said. "They're going to issue a formal apology, and they want to reinstate you to critical care effective immediately." "I don't want an apology," I said. He blinked. "What do you want?" I thought about it. "I want to know that this won't happen to someone else." Jim nodded slowly. "I'll make sure of it." I turned to leave. "Margaret?" I looked back. "What you did? Standing up when everyone else stayed quiet? That took guts." I smiled faintly. "No, it just took knowing I was right." I walked out into the cold evening air. My phone buzzed. Another text. The same DC number. Update. Consultation request escalated. Expect formal briefing within 72 hours. Stand by. I stared at the message. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The formal apology came 3 days later. Not in private. Not in some quiet HR office where they could bury it. In the main conference room, with the full board of directors, administrators, department heads, and a written statement that would go into my permanent file. Patricia Vance stood at the head of the table and read it aloud. "The board has conducted a thorough review of recent events involving Margaret Collier, RN. We have determined that Ms. Collier was subjected to discriminatory treatment based on age, that her professional record was falsified, and that she was unlawfully implicated in fraudulent activities she had no knowledge of or participation in." She paused. "We deeply regret the harm caused. Effective immediately, Ms. Collier's full privileges and responsibilities are restored. She will be reassigned to critical care at her discretion, and all falsified documentation has been expunged from her record." I sat at the table, hands folded in my lap. Patricia looked at me. "Margaret, on behalf of the hospital, I apologize." I nodded. "Thank you." She sat down. There was a long silence. One of the board members, a man I'd never met, cleared his throat. "Miss Collier, we'd also like to offer you a settlement for the emotional distress and professional harm you experienced." "I don't want money," I said. He blinked. "I'm sorry. I want policy changes. I want mandatory bias training for all supervisors. I want an independent review process for performance complaints. And I want protection for employees who report misconduct." The room went quiet. Patricia leaned forward. "We can do that. Then we're done here." I stood and walked out. Behind me, I heard murmuring. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. I didn't care which. I went back to work the next day. Not to the geriatric wing. To the IC. The charge nurse, a woman named Carol, who'd worked with me years ago, smiled when she saw me. "Welcome back, Margaret." "Thanks." She handed me a tablet. "We've got a sepsis case in Bay 3. Post-op complications. She's deteriorating fast." I took the tablet and scanned the chart. 62-year-old female. Infection spreading. Blood pressure dropping. I walked into the bay. The patient was pale, her breathing shallow. The monitors were beeping warnings. I checked her 4 lines. Adjusted the fluids. Ordered a new round of antibiotics and contacted the attending. Within an hour, her vitals stabilized. Carol came by later. "You haven't lost a step." I smiled faintly. I never did. That evening, my phone rang. The DC number. I answered. "Ms. Collier, this is David Brennan. I'm calling to inform you that your consultation request has been approved at the executive level." My heart started pounding. What does that mean? "It means we need you in Washington. Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? A car will pick you up at 6 a.m. You'll be briefed en route. The assignment is time-sensitive and classified. I can't provide details over the phone." "How long will I be gone? 48 to 72 hours? Possibly longer, depending on circumstances." I sat down slowly. Mr. Brennan? What exactly am I being asked to do? There was a pause. We're facing a scenario that requires someone with your specific experience. Someone who can make high-stakes decisions under pressure without hesitation. Someone we can trust. And you think that's me? I know it is. I closed my eyes. Okay, I said. I'll be ready. Good. And Miss Collier? Yes. Thank you. He hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Then I called Jim. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. Federal assignment. I don't know when I'll be back. He was quiet for a moment. Is this about the task force? I think so. Margaret, are you sure about this? I thought about the last few weeks. The humiliation. The lies. The fight to prove I still mattered. I'm sure. Then go show them what you're made of. I smiled. I will. The next morning, I stood in my driveway at 5:50 a.m., a small suitcase at my feet. At exactly 6, a black sedan pulled up. The driver got out and opened the door. Ms. Collier? That's me. He took my suitcase. We'll be at the airport in 20 minutes. There's a briefing packet in the back seat. I slid into the car. On the seat was a manila envelope. Classified markings. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. National Crisis Response Initiative. Temporary medical consultant. Security clearance. Pending, and beneath it, a handwritten note. We don't need someone famous. We need someone competent. Thank you for answering the call. I stared at the words. For 32 years, I'd worked in the shadows. Doing the job. Saving lives. Never asking for recognition. And now, when it mattered most, someone had remembered. Not my age, not my limitations, my skill. I folded the paper and looked out the window as the city rolled past. I was ready. The plane was small, private. The kind you see in movies but never imagine you'd actually board. I was the only passenger. A flight attendant offered me coffee. I accepted. Mostly because my hands needed something to hold. We landed at a private airfield outside Washington 3 hours later. Another car was waiting. This time, the driver didn't speak. Just drove through the city in silence until we pulled up to a nondescript office building with no visible signage. Inside, security was tight. Metal detectors, badge scans, a full credential check. Finally, I was escorted to a small briefing room. David Brennan was waiting. He was older than I'd imagined. Late 50s, maybe? Graying hair? Sharp eyes. The kind of man who'd spent a career making decisions other people couldn't. He stood when I entered. Ms. Collier, thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had a choice. He smiled faintly. You always have a choice. But I'm grateful you made this one. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He placed a folder on the table between us. Classified markings. Red border. What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. I nodded. 72 hours ago, we identified a potential public health crisis. A patient presented at a federal facility with symptoms consistent with a highly contagious pathogen. We're still determining the exact strain, but preliminary indicators suggest it could spread rapidly in hedonicity environments. My chest tightened. How bad? We don't know yet. But we need to prepare for the worst. That means protocol development, containment strategies, and resource allocation in a scenario where time is the most critical factor. And you need me because in Baltimore, you designed a triage system that prioritized outcomes over optics. You made decisions that saved lives when everyone else was paralyzed by fear of making the wrong call. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of my case study, annotated, highlighted, notes in the margins. This has been required reading for our crisis response teams for the last decade, he said quietly. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. You didn't have enough resources. You didn't have enough time. And you still made it work. I stared at the pages. I'd almost forgotten I'd written that. What do you need from me? I asked. We're assembling a task force. Epidemiologists, emergency planners, logistics coordinators. But we need someone who understands what happens on the ground. In the ICU? In the moment when the plan falls apart and you have to improvise? He leaned forward. I need you to tell us what you'd do if this scenario became real. Not theoretically. Practically. What works? What doesn't? What we're missing? I thought about the last 32 years. The patients who lived because I saw something no one else saw. The ones who died because there wasn't enough time or equipment or staff. When do we start? I asked. Now. The task force met in a secure conference room 2 floors down. 8 people. All younger than me. All brilliant. David introduced me. This is Margaret Collier. She's our clinical consultant. A few polite nods. 1 or 2 skeptical glances. I didn't care. David pulled up a simulation on the screen. A hospital. Overwhelmed. Patients flooding in faster than they could be processed. This is the scenario, he said. Day 3 of an outbreak. 600 patients. 200 beds. 50 ventilators. What do you do? The room went quiet. One of the epidemiologists spoke up. We implement standard triage. Red, yellow, green. And when you run out of red capacity? David asked. Silence. I cleared my throat. You don't wait for red capacity. You create a 4th category? Everyone turned to look at me. Expectant, I said quietly. Patients who won't survive even with intervention. You don't abandon them. But you don't allocate critical resources to them either. You make them comfortable. And you move on. The room shifted uncomfortably. That's brutal, someone said. It's honest, I replied. And in a crisis, honesty saves more lives than hope. David nodded slowly. Go on. I stood and walked to the whiteboard. You also need a secondary site. A field hospital. Not for treatment, for stabilization. Somewhere you can send yellow cases while you clear red capacity. You need transport protocols. You need communication redundancy. And you need someone with the authority to make real-time decisions without waiting for approval. I wrote it all out. Step by step. The way I'd done it in Baltimore when no one was watching. When I finished, the room was silent. One of the younger doctors, a man named Kevin, spoke up. This is ... actually workable? It's not just workable, David said. It's what we're going to use. He looked at me. Margaret, I'd like you to stay on as an active consultant through the end of the week. We'll need your input as we finalize the protocols. I'll stay as long as you need me. He smiled. Good. That night, I sat in my hotel room and stared at my phone. There was a message from Jim. The hospital's asking when you'll be back. Should I tell them anything? I thought about it. Then I typed, tell them I'll be back when I'm done. I sent it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because someone told me I was too old, but because someone remembered I was good enough. The briefing lasted for more days. We worked through scenarios, revised protocols, debated resource allocation until my voice went hoarse. And every time someone questioned a decision, David turned to me. Margaret, what would you do? I told them. Not theories. Not textbook answers. Real decisions. The kind you make when there's no time to second guess, and lives hang in the balance. By the end of the week, the protocols were complete. David walked me to the car on my last day. You know, he said, when I pulled your file, half the team questioned it. They said you were too far removed from current practice. That we needed someone younger, more familiar with modern systems. I smiled faintly. And what did you tell them? I told them I didn't need someone who knew the latest technology. I needed someone who knew how to think when the technology fails. He handed me an envelope. This is a formal letter of commendation. It'll go into your federal file. If we ever need you again, and I suspect we will, you'll be the first call we make." I took the envelope. "Thank you." "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." We shook hands. And then I got in the car and headed home. When I walked back into County General 5 days later, the hospital felt different. Or maybe I felt different. I clocked in at the nurse's station. Carol looked up and smiled. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" "Productive." She handed me a tablet. "We've got a full ICU today. You up for it?" "Always." I spent the day doing what I'd always done. Monitoring vitals. Adjusting treatments. Catching the small things that turned into big problems if you weren't paying attention. At the end of my shift, Patricia Vance stopped by. "Margaret, a word?" We stepped into the hallway. "I received a call this morning," she said, "from someone in Washington. They wanted to confirm that you'd returned and that you were still employed here. And they made it very clear that if this hospital ever interfered with your availability for federal consultation again, there would be consequences." She paused. "They also said you're being considered for a permanent advisory position." I didn't say anything. "Margaret, what exactly did you do in Washington?" I smiled. "My job." She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded. "Well, whatever it was, it made an impression." She walked away. I stood there for a moment, watching the hospital move around me. Doctors rushing past, nurses checking charts, families waiting for news. It all looked the same. But I wasn't the same person who'd been humiliated at this nurse's station weeks ago. I wasn't the person they'd tried to erase. I was the person they called when it mattered most. That night, I got one more message. From David. "The protocols you helped develop are being implemented nationwide. You should be proud." I stared at the words. Proud. I thought about Susan. About the lies. About the months of being told I was too slow, too old, too irrelevant. And I realized something. She'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. Not because I was exceptional, but because I'd spent 32 years doing the work. Quietly. Competently, without needing applause or recognition. And when it finally mattered, when lives were actually on the line, that was what they needed. Not youth, not charisma, not office politics, just someone who knew what the hell they were doing. I set my phone down and looked out the window. Somewhere in Washington, protocols I'd helped write were being printed, distributed, taught, and somewhere in this hospital, a young nurse was learning the same lessons I'd learned decades ago. That experience doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand attention. It just shows up, does the work, and waits to be called when everything else falls apart. I thought about typing a response to David, but I didn't. Instead, I sent a different message. To Jim, "I'm staying, but on my terms." He replied immediately. "Wouldn't expect anything less?" I smiled. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. Because tomorrow, I'd be back in the ICU, doing what I'd always done. Saving lives. Not because someone finally recognized me, but because that's who I'd always been. And no one, not Susan, not the hospital, not age itself, could ever take that away. 3 weeks later, I was restocking supplies in Bay for when my phone rang. "The DC number," I answered. "Miss Collier, this is David Brennan. We have a situation. How soon can you be in Washington?" I glanced at the clock, then at the ICU around me. "Give me 2 hours. We'll have a car waiting." I hung up. Carol looked over. "Everything okay?" I grabbed my jacket. "Everything's fine," I said. "I just have to go do my job." She smiled. "Go." I walked out of the hospital, got in the car, and drove toward the airport. Not because I was special, but because when it mattered most, someone still knew exactly who to call. And this time, I wasn't invisible. I was indispensable. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt invisible until the moment you were finally seen,